Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Sero Boost, where we talk about all things happiness science. And today's topic is Charities' impact on life satisfaction. Our guest of today is very lovely, and she has the whole research on this, so I'm excited to talk to her about it. I think we're not that new to charity in our lives, and we probably engage in it in one way or another, at least in some shape or form, or at least we've heard about it. So today, hopefully, we're going to learn even more about the topic in relation to happiness. So first of all, let me introduce everyone to our guest of the day today. Dr. Adrienne Sudbury grew up in East Tennessee and earned her PhD in economics at the University of Tennessee. After graduation, she accepted a position at Longwood University as an assistant professor of economics. She teaches both undergraduate and graduate courses in microeconomics, macroeconomics, and experimental economics. Her research interests include behavioral and public economics with a focus on philanthropy, crowdfunding, and experiments. She currently lives in Virginia with her husband, 2 children, and 2 dogs. Welcome to the show, Adrienne.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us when it's Sunday evening, your time. I know it's probably not how people imagine ending their weekend, doing, but I think this is probably going to be fun. And I think it's just wonderful. I think in a way you're kind of giving to our community by doing this. And I would probably consider that part of philanthropy. I don't know if your research says the same thing, but I think it is donating your time to help others.
Very much so. I think time is a big factor that a lot of people tend to give, and I'm more than happy to join you guys, even though it is Sunday evening. I've been looking forward to it all day.
Yeah, it's actually going to be a fun conversation because, a fun fact that I haven't mentioned on the show is my bachelor's degree was actually in international economics. But the interesting thing about that, when I read your bio is, we actually did not get to learn anything about philanthropy. Probably a little bit on crowdfunding for businesses, but not a lot, not a whole heaps on philanthropy. And I think it was probably like background is the degree was in Vietnam, where I'm from. And I think it was just so interesting that it was never mentioned within the duration of the 4 years that I took the course. And so when I was, reading up on today's topic in preparation for this conversation, I was quite pleasantly surprised because, this is probably the first time we have someone in your space on the show and also talking about this particular topic in relation to happiness. So yeah, I'm excited to find out more about it as well. And before we go into the topic, we have a little part we called Have You Met Adrienne? Just to get to know you a bit better. So we've got a few questions for you just to get to know what you like and what are some of the things that would highlight who you are as a person. So the first question is my favorite because I love reading. What is your favorite book?
That's actually a very challenging question for me because I love to read. And I'm a person who loves to read mostly fiction, fantasy. And so it's very difficult for me to narrow it down. But if I had to pick, I would say the Mistborn series by Brandon Sanderson.
Mm.
It's
Okay.
full of action and adventure, and everyone I've gotten to read the book has agreed that it is fantastic. So
Okay. Well, you got me on board. I'm going to definitely try that because that's probably one of my favorite things to read too. And I have found that I've been reading a lot of serious books. And sometimes it's just good to get back into something fun. So that's what I'm trying to do this year. Like New Year, going back to an old but new thing. Just read stories and fun things. So yeah.
yeah, I read a lot for my job, and a lot of papers, a lot of very serious things. And so my my happy place is to escape to different worlds and different places. And so that's
Yeah.
why I love, great world building books. And so that's why it's hard to choose just one.
Yeah. Oh, I couldn't agree more. I think that's the best about reading, especially because some of these things live in our head, right? Because we get to imagine how it plays out. So I think in a way we're kind of like the director of the movie, if there was one in our mind, if there isn't one yet. And I think that's the best part about reading these kinds of books. Now, speaking of movie, which one would be your favorite?
My favorite movies of all time are The Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
I grew up seeing them in theaters, and as a lover of all things fantasy, they just spoke to me. And I watch them regularly every year.
Yeah.
They're like your comfort food, but comfort movies, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I'm not surprised, especially when you talked about the books. I was kind of like, probably going to be sci-fi fantasy that you're going to recommend or share when it comes to movies. So yeah, definitely the good movies of Lord of the Rings. That reminds me, I should watch them again. It's been a while. So next one is about podcast. You are our podcast guest of the day, and I tell my audience this all the time. The fun fact is our guests actually don't listen to podcasts that much. Probably only half of the guests actually listen to podcasts themselves. So if you are a podcast listener, which show would be your favorite?
Well, for purely entertainment purposes, I love Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR, National Public Radio. It's a news game show that they host every week, and it's just hilarious, to be honest. It's hosted by comedians, and they just try to guess what's going on in the news, and it's all of like the most ridiculous things. It's fantastic. If I had to choose a podcast for learning or something that, I choose to listen to for interest, it's usually Freakonomics Radio or Planet Money. Both are economics focused, but in a way that kind of broadens the knowledge for anybody who wanted to listen.
Yeah, that's cool, and great that you gave recommendation on both ends. I think the fun podcast, I don't think I've come across that many. So it's good to hear that there's another one that's new to me. And yeah, the economics one definitely very serious and so in alignment with what you study and work on. So that's good to know. Now, next one, I would love to know about your role model. Some people have one role model, some people have multiple role models, and other people kind of say, I actually don't have one. So which train are you on? And if you're on the train that has a role model at least, then who would that be?
So I don't have just one role model.
Okay.
I would say as an academic, I was heavily influenced by my professors and teachers growing up. And especially in graduate school, I had so many wonderful mentors. And so that really stuck with me. And as I became a professor, it encouraged me and taught me how to be that mentor to my students, both in and out of the classroom. And so I would not be as good of a professor or even a person in general without having experienced that. So that's kind of what I tried to emulate in my professional career.
Yeah, very cool. Great to hear. I think that's inspiring because I guess when it comes to education, as I briefly mentioned, my degree, my bachelor's degree, it was actually quite hard because I didn't find anyone that would influence me during that time. And then later on, when I did my postgrad, that's when I found, more inspiring people. And I think that's the best part about learning and, getting to know all these amazing people that slowly become your role models, that influence you in different ways. And I think that's the nice thing about life, actually. So great to know that you've got multiple. And last one, I think probably in alignment with what you just mentioned, because obviously in your academic career, you got a lot of influence. I'm sure you would have a course that has inspired you. Maybe this is something that you took a really long time ago, or perhaps something more recently. So which one would it be?
It would be my first economics course in undergraduate. I was not an economics major at first. I was actually an international studies major, and was put in economics because one does need economics knowledge to study international studies. And I had just the most wonderful professor, Dr. Zayed Kalani, and he was fantastic. He inspired everyone in the class. And before I knew it, I was taking another course and another course and another course. And then I switched my major. And after that, I decided I wanted to be, that inspiration for other people. So
Beautiful. Wow, that's so lovely to hear. And that's why you're the perfect guest today, because you get so much knowledge and so much inspiration that you can share all that you know with us, especially through the lens of economics, which is super important to this conversation. So let's get started and talk about it. Now, this is about happiness science. So, of course, we would love to understand where our guests are coming from when it comes to happiness. Is such a broad concept, and each person views it differently. So I wonder how you view it personally.
Well, in economics, we refer to something known as utility. And it's you're always trying to maximize your utility. And that has to do a lot with budget analysis and, you know, buying the things that, make you the happiest, or using your time in a way that makes you the happiest. And so the way I see happiness is through that lens a lot of times. So I'm always trying to maximize my utility. And, and of course, in economics, we put math to it.
Yeah.
And so it's a weird sum game that you try to think about, we think of decisions on the margin. So it's like, which of these two options am I going to do, or which one is going to maximize my utility? And happiness is a huge factor in that.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting that we have this lens on the show now, because as I mentioned, we've never had this before. And I think in economics, there's, if anything stuck with me throughout my whole undergrad, is probably opportunity cost. And I think that has a lot to do with happiness too, because, we make decisions in life, right? And sometimes we kind of think, will this make me happy? Am I missing out? Because there's a lot of FOMO going on, fear of missing out. That's like a really big deal nowadays. And I think that probably plays into the economics of everything, and also that concept of opportunity cost when it comes to happiness. But I do also think it's not always the sum. Sometimes it's actually just being happy with the fact that you missed out on something. Because by missing out on this certain thing, you get to experience some other things. For example, some of my friends say, oh, like I didn't get to work, because some of them might be still doing casual jobs or shift jobs, and like, oh, I didn't get to work this shift on this weekend, and I just had to chill. And you know what? That was actually, when you think about it, it adds to your happiness when you relax and spend time with friends, even though you make a little less money that week, maybe. So I think that's an interesting thing if you view it from both the economics lens and also like I don't know, just the life lens, because it's not always about the sum game, What do you think?
Oh, no, I definitely agree. I've been on maternity leave for the last, 5 months or so, and it was definitely different. I definitely had some FOMO sitting out during the fall semester, but then, you kind of try to put things into perspective and think, but I get to stay home with my babies and, just enjoy every minute, because you're not going to get that back.
That's so true. Now, I think in the world of economic studies, probably there's a lot of studies on how people spend their time, their money on utility, like you're saying, what you mentioned earlier. But I guess there's also, I'm guessing there should be research on what people think, or how they spend their time and money on certain things to add to their happiness, and they might get certain things wrong. For example, spending more money. Some of our guests mentioned on the show, spending more money does not necessarily make you happier. In fact, it might be the opposite. Or, you can actually spend money on better things, which is probably going to be one of the things that we cover a little bit later today when we talk about charity and philanthropy. But what do you think to be some of the biggest things that people tend to get wrong when it comes to happiness?
I think, economics wise, you're right in that people tend to make irrational decisions. We like to assume rationality. That's how we build all of our models. That's how we try to model behavior. But then you take into account the fact that not everyone behaves rationally, and especially I'd say every person behaves irrationally at some point in their lives.
Yeah.
And so that's really where the field of experimental economics has come into play. It's, we test these theories using different types of experiments and models, and then we realize, oh, people aren't behaving like we thought they would. Maybe they are overspending, or why are they doing this versus, this other choice when, the mathematics, the economic sum game says they should be making choice A. And so that's, I think, what's really key and what's really beautiful about research in my area is that you get to kind of pick those different pieces apart.
Yeah, definitely. So coming back to the question, what do you think, though, personally? Let's say, based on all that observation, what do you think to be one of the biggest things that people tend to just get wrong when it comes to happiness? That maybe they're spending their time and money in the wrong space, and that ties right into charity, right? Because I know a lot of people who are more than willing to, let's say, spend money partying on a Saturday night, and that will make them miserable the next day. Where, in fact, if they spend that money on charity, let's say, they'll feel so much happier, even if they spend even less.
So I think that has a lot to do with, and what I would argue is a lot of self-reflection and taking the time to make those decisions. And a lot of times being influenced by others and what would make other people happy. Maybe your friends are the ones that convinced you to go to that party.
Yeah.
Versus, you taking the time to think about what would make you happiest. And sometimes that's just to go home and go to bed. As a parent, I've learned to value my sleep very much so.
Yeah.
And what makes you happy changes. And I think learning to adapt is hard for some people, or even just it takes time to learn that your preferences have changed and so your habits need to change with that.
That's so true. Such a great point, because I think it's a fluid concept. When it comes to happiness, it's not going to be the same thing throughout our lives. And like now you're in a phase where you would love to spend more time with your babies. So that's probably definitely different compared to 10 years ago, maybe. Probably you've completely different priorities, and different things that have made you happy at that time, but not now. So it's good to just hear different lens. And speaking of lenses, we are going to talk about economy and charity. I think, again, I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, this is probably not a new concept to a lot of people. Everyone knows what charity is. But, in your world of economy and, having studied economics at length, in depth, what do you think charity is actually?
So there's been a lot of economic thought into why people give to charity. The original thought process is, you should behave in your own self-interest. And so giving money away doesn't really make sense when you think of it in a dollar sense. And so there's been a lot of talk and research, and we've narrowed it down to kind of two different forms of altruism. And the first type of altruism is pure altruism. And that's just where people give to charity because it's the right thing to do, or because that project really needed the money. And it's completely selfless in that sense. And then there's impure altruism. And there's nothing wrong with impure altruism. But it's the idea is that you are motivated for other reasons that usually in a way benefit you. And being happy is one of those accidental things that happens through impure altruism. And we call that warm glow in economics. So giving to charity makes you happy. And that's perfectly fine. There are also other social factors that we've identified, social pressures, not wanting to be out of place. Sometimes people give more because they have no reference points. And so there's a lot of different things that we've identified in terms of why some people might give more than others and why some people give versus don't give.
That's interesting for sure, because I think that the second part of your answer, I remember this part in the TV series Friends. If anyone has watched that, they probably know what I'm talking about. I think the one where Joey and Phoebe were having a conversation about the fact that no act of charity is actually like pure altruism. Like you're selfish for giving it, and you feel good after giving to charity, and that means you're selfish, so you're doing that for yourself as well. And they had a whole fight about it, and then eventually Phoebe gave in, and she realized that yes, giving to charity indeed makes her feel better. So it doesn't just help the people that would benefit the amount, but also herself. And I think that's the most interesting part about charity. It doesn't just help people, it helps ourselves, and sometimes helps ourselves more than the people that we are helping.
Exactly. And it was something I didn't really understand until I was in grad school, when somebody pieced that out for me, and the impure and impure altruism. And I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. That is why a lot of people give to charity. Is we're not very rarely motivated by pure altruism. There's usually some combination of how it makes us feel and the reasons why we personally give versus just the cause itself.
Yeah, definitely. So I think as we have established just now, definitely, when you engage in charitable activities or give to charity, just for money, maybe even your time, you feel better, and that adds to your happiness. But I don't think it's the same across different kinds of charity, and also it probably impacts your level of happiness depending on how you engage in it. That's kind of my guess, because it's not going to be the same thing. And also, it depends on how often you engage in the activity too, right? So, how would charity impact our happiness when we consider all these factors?
So I'll give you an example. One of the charities that we are involved in and like to give back to frequently is a rescue organization that rescues dogs. We rescued a dog from this group. She's a lovely little husky mix Freya. She has 3 legs. They paid for her surgery, and we had her basically just out of recovery from that, and she's been our little baby ever since. But that's a cause that's near and dear to our heart. And so I think no matter the amount that you're giving, the amount of happiness and satisfaction from engaging in something that means something to you personally is going to be a much better experience than just donating to a charity that, randomly asks you on the street, or, that somebody just mentions in passing, because this is something that's going to cause you to think about it more than just the time in which you're going to write that check.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I actually remember, because when I first moved to Australia, like I didn't know about street fundraising back then, and that was like probably one of the first times that I encountered with fundraisers on the street, and that person was from UNICEF, and then after one conversation with them, I was like, sold. I'm broke. I'm a student, but I'm gonna give to charity. Now I started signing up, and they just took money from my account every month, and it was not a big amount. So I didn't pay much attention. And to be honest, I didn't remember much of it. And sometimes I even forget that it's a thing that recurs monthly. And I remember it was probably the end of the first year, because every end of financial year they would send you like a thank you letter to update you with the progress. That's when it kind of hits me. Oh, well, this is what I am actually engaging in, and it means something. And then cut to, I think, 2 years later, when I started volunteering here in Melbourne, and volunteering for Study Melbourne to help international students like myself back in the day. And, just spending, I think, 2 hours once, probably every 3 months, I felt so much more compared to, having money taken from my bank account every month. And it definitely changes how I view philanthropy and charity in general, because I was like, oh, you know what, this is way more meaningful. Like, I get to actually interact with the people that I'm talking to. But at the same time, when I see those letters sent to me annually from UNICEF, I'm also like, oh, this is actually so good. Like, I'm so glad I'm donating. So I guess there's just like this difference in the level of engagement, just like what you were saying. And for a lot of people, they might start to wonder, okay, so there are so many kinds of charity out there, and is this just so hard to decide? And I don't even know, like, should I trust them? Because I think that's a really big thing that a lot of people sort of start questioning, right? So I wonder if this is something that you probably look into in your studies, if not totally good, but would love to hear your perspective, because our audience might start to wonder, okay, so what kind of charity should I actually engage in? And, how does it actually help, the people that I think I'm donating to? Because sometimes they kind of like, oh, I don't think the money actually goes to them.
So I don't personally research this area, but I do know a little bit about it. There's a lot of different websites out there. I'm trying to remember the one off the top of my head, but I can't. That rate charitable organizations, and they'll break down their spending. And there have been a few experiments by economists where they try to figure out what is driving people to give to different organizations. And a couple of takeaways that I do remember is that if a lot of their spending doesn't actually go to the cause in question, and it's going to overhead of employees, marketing, things like that. Susan G. Komen's fundraiser for breast cancer is one of those that typically gets thrown into that bin. That usually makes people upset, and that causes them to give less. And they would much prefer to see a charity where a majority of the donations are actually going to the cause or the people or the animals that they're actually advertising that your money should be helping.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to know for sure. I remember I saw this, I went to this pitch competition in Melbourne not long ago for startups. And one of the startups actually was pitching that similar idea where they were talking about the idea that, there are so many charities out there. If you don't know which one to donate to, we'll create a profile match for you. And then will highlight how they're spending the money that you're donating. I think it was like a monthly report sent back to you. I can't remember the name of the organization now, but I think that's such a great idea. So that startup is one of the 5 that made it to the final round of the pitch competition. So I think that's just definitely why, because like you're saying, there are probably a few websites that show these things, but it's just hard nowadays because another thing that I think charities probably struggle with, exactly what you were saying, overheads, and they try to cut costs. And you know what? Charities are supposed to be the organizations that operate the best, where employee experience needs to be high. And that's where they really struggle, I guess, because they need to cut costs. And then at the same time, they need to raise funds. So how do they manage that, the money that they get to be able to get to that goal while treating their staff right and, doing everything right? I guess it's actually quite hard when you think about it from that perspective. It's probably it's just something for our audience to think about, because sometimes we tend to criticize charities that are not doing the right thing. But at the same time, I think it's actually quite hard. And any charities that are doing a great job, they must put, a huge amount of investment, and there's got to be a lot of thinking that goes in there, but it's really not as easy as it seems.
Oh, 100% is not as easy as it seems. The more money you put into that overhead cost of paying your employees well, having, a decent enough salary to attract the right director, somebody who really knows what they're doing and can improve marketing. Those are all things that are really important for a charity to grow. But a lot of times we don't, as donors, put value onto that. And so it is this dual problem, like you were pointing out.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think it's just something to be mindful of, because I have a little bit of background in economics. I know a little bit about this, not much, but I guess, the average audience, if they have no idea how organizations operate, they might just, think this is so easy. Why do you have to struggle so much? Like, we're already donating, but it's actually not that easy. For you to know about the charity, they have to put in so much investment for you to know about them in the first place. And yeah, I think it's interesting because I know you didn't study this area particularly. So now let's talk about what you actually study when it comes to this area. So I'm curious to know more about your study in this area. What exactly did you cover, and what are some of the things that you would like to highlight to your audience when it comes to philanthropy?
So my particular area of interest is the type of question that is asked and how does that get people to donate, how much and how often. So I was sitting in a graduate class on experimental economics, and we had to come up with an idea, and I was going to the grocery store. And I don't know how prevalent this is in Australia, but in the US, it's very popular now that when you go to check out, they're either on the pin pad or, the cashier might ask you, would you like to donate $1 to this charity today? And it kind of hit me. And I said, I don't think I've read anything about this. Has anybody looked at what kind of, questions are being asked and how efficient are they? So I designed an experiment to test those different things. And we got a bunch of students in a lab. We had them earn money. And then at the end, we surprised them with a donation question, just like you would be surprised with one at the grocery store. And what we did is we varied the type of ask. So we asked people that typical rounding question. So would you like to round up, your earnings? We asked people just for a fixed amount, like, would you donate $1? And then we also asked them just an open-ended question. How much would you like to donate? And we looked at the differences in, how many people were donating and then how much they were donating, and found very large differences, even in amounts that were all under $5.
Wow.
Yeah. What we found is that the fixed amount where you asked them, say, like 25 cents all the way up to, say, $2, they donated much more often. So the donation rates were very, very high. But in the open-ended question, a lot fewer people donated, but they donated much higher amounts. So it's this dual problem.
Right. That is so interesting. I guess a lot of people, tend to agree and go for the, maybe 25 cent or, $1 or $2 because it's just easier for them to decide. Because some people are kind of like, oh, I don't know. Like, I don't know how much. I kind of cannot decide. Or if there's an open-ended question, most of the time they would probably be like, no, thanks. Because it's just so hard to think on the spot. So I guess, having options is probably one of those reasons why I feel like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll do it. But the grocery store observation that you had was interesting because here in Australia we actually do have that, at especially at self checkouts. I'll give two examples of how it works in Australia. So there are two things that I know the most because this is how I engage with charities the most. One is at the grocery stores, when you go to the self checkout, before you check out, they will say, would you like to round up your purchase to la la la, so that you can, to donate however many cents or, like 50 cents or whatever it is to this particular charity. And then another option, another scenario is I think there's an Australian brand. I'm not sure if it's popular in the US. It's called Conon, and they have a Conon Foundation. And I learned about them when I first moved to Australia, and I was really impressed because every time I shop, they would ask, would you like to purchase a charity product? It goes straight to charity. They don't ask, you to round anything up, but they would ask them because I remembered, and this is very funny, but I remembered when I first moved here, I was so impressed at the number of options for tote bags. Tote bags were new to me back in the day, okay? 6 years ago, they were like, oh, so new. I was actually in a tote bag phase. And I remember that Conon had so many options for tote bags, and they're all charity products. And they back in the day, they were $2 each. Now they're $5. But I remember I was like, every time I went shopping, I was like, yeah, I'll get a tote bag. It's $2. I'm donating to charity. I'm not using a plastic bag. I'm going to use this again. Sounds great to me. And it was so easy to engage in charitable activities, and I felt good about myself afterwards, as I'm sure a lot of other customers would. So the first scenario of going to the grocery stores and rounding up, you know what? Most of the time I actually don't round up because I'm like, I don't know how much this is actually going to help. If you really want me to donate, like I'll probably find another way. Or I like to, engage in volunteering activities in person. The second scenario, I do that way more. And, sometimes like now they have so many different kinds of products, like hand sanitizer, mints, and all these different charity products that they have for their foundation. And I just find it inspiring. I'm sure a lot of other brands do this too. Like I think another brand in Australia has this thing called the Butterfly Foundation. I can't remember which brand it is, probably Sports Girl, if I'm not wrong. But yeah, they do similar things. But I just really like that they ask this at the end before you get out of the store. And one of the things that I found interesting, and I'm going to tell you, if I say no to them, because it's a human person asking me, would you like to, purchase a charity product to donate to, for example, girls who are, pursuing their education in Uganda? If I say no, I feel like an asshole. Okay. So my level of happiness that day is probably going to be a little bit lower. So on most days, most of the time, probably 90% of the time, I say yes. So here's the big question, is this, in economics, I'm sure there are studies on this. Is this a mind game? Sometimes they're playing to get people to donate more.
There's been a lot of studies on that. So it's
Yeah.
some combination of social pressure. So like when you're engaging with a physical person versus maybe like a self-checkout, it's a lot easier for you to say, no to the self-checkout versus a person who's asking you specifically for a cause. No, a lot of people feel that way. There's we would frame it as, saying no offers you disutility. So it like takes away from your happiness.
Right.
And then saying yes sometimes cannot make people happy either because they feel pressured into saying yes. So you might feel really happy about being asked, but other people might not. And so it's this decision task of trying to figure out, okay, which one's going to make me better off? Is it going to be to say yes to avoid having, disutility, social pressure, saying, for people judging me for saying no or feeling like an asshole, or do I just say yes and donate it, and then I might have a small bit of disutility because I didn't actually want to give to that charity. They could be like you and prefer to donate time, or they might have a different charity that they prefer to engage with versus the one that they're being asked about. And so at least here, it's extremely prevalent. I feel like I'm asked now at every other store that I check out at. So, in some instances, you might even have fatigue on being asked in these scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was such a good point you were raising, because this sense of disutility because you didn't really want to donate to that particular charity is interesting, right? Because today's topic is about how it adds to our life satisfaction, not take away from it. So if we were to summarize how charity can add to our life satisfaction, what would the key factors be?
I would say if you're going to engage with a charity, I would pick a charity that would make you happy to donate. So something that is going to give you that happiness or warm glow factor. So something that is dear to your heart, a cause that you appreciate, maybe something that you yourself have benefited from or know someone who has benefited from or could potentially see yourself benefiting from in the future. So that's what we tend to engage in is the ones that we've been personally impacted by. For example, my father-in-law is really into March of Dimes, which focuses on neonatal care because my sister-in-law was born premature. And so that's been something that they have since then engaged with on a yearly basis.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's tough, right? Knowing which one to donate to. And sometimes people have stories like what you were just telling me, something that they personally relate to, and they've gone through this particular situation that drives them to actually engage in the charity. Now, for other people, they might just go, I actually have no idea, because I have never engaged in charities. I don't have any particular traumas in my life that is driving me to, help others yet. So if that is the case, how do they know which charity to engage in? Or just not even donate to, but maybe do some volunteering activities with? Because for some people, they might just have no clue what to do.
Yes, I mean, I would say I was probably in that bin very early on in college, in my college education. A lot of people aren't around or exposed to those different charities early on. And so a couple of recommendations I would have is, if you are a student, are any of your organizations volunteering or working with organizations on campus? Are there any campus organizations that you could get involved in? If you're not a student, look at the most community-based organizations, the ones that might impact your neighbors. I would maybe start there. A lot of times there's food banks in every location. That would be a great place to either start volunteering or potentially even just donate food to. But those would be some starter points that I would suggest.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. That sounds great, because I think it's always about taking the first step, right? And I think for people that don't know what they relate to at all, starting with their community is probably a good place to start. Because I think for me personally, I was donating to UNICEF not because I had any like personal stories that would kind of like strike me to donate to them. I just hear the stories they tell me, and I think my level of empathy is quite high, so I was kind of like, okay, yeah, definitely, let's go for that. And later on, I think a few years later, I was kind of like, oh, but like now I really wanted to help international students like myself way back in the day. Why don't I do that? I understand their pain point. I understand exactly what they're going through and how much they're struggling. And it's not charity, but it's like volunteering activities. And I think a lot of organizations are like that. If you're kind of like, oh, I don't know any charities, you can probably look at maybe NGOs, organizations that support your local communities or communities that you are part of or relate to or care about. So just like you said, so many options. Just got to start somewhere. Cool. So now that we have talked about how it impacts our life satisfaction, and happiness, we know that it's a good thing. It's just right off the bat, it has always been a good thing. It's never been a bad thing. But some of our audience members might start to wonder, okay, Adrienne, but I actually don't have that much money to donate. Time, I'm also a little tight on time. So how can they engage in, philanthropy and wealth? I'm guessing is not the biggest factor here.
It's a large contributor. I mean, we do see trends of the wealthier people tend to donate more monetarily. Um, but from personal experience, I've often seen that the people who are most generous are not the wealthiest. It's the people who, kind of getting back to, have experienced some form or another of giving, or benefited from generosity in the past, and they tend to be the most generous people that I have encountered. So I encourage you to think about, you know, what have you benefited from in the past? And it could even just be as simple as advice from a teacher or mentor, time that somebody has given to you. If you're in the Scouts organization, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, that's all volunteer work by parents and community leaders. And so just thinking about how you could get involved in something simple like that. If you're a parent, could you help one of your child's organizations out an hour a week? It'd be something that would contribute, add to life satisfaction, but also not take a whole lot of time.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great recommendation for those that are finding it hard to, either donate money or spend time volunteering and helping others. And I think it's also an interesting thing because a lot of people kind of saying you either have time or money. You cannot have both. So I guess if that is true, then we can definitely choose one or the other. Depending on what we have. If we have the money but we don't have time, then we donate money. If we don't have money but we do have a little bit of time, then time would be great to look at in terms of engaging in these activities and communities, like you were saying. So that's all kind of good to know, and theoretically it sounds great. So now let's get into something a little bit more practical in our practice section. So you've we pointed our audience to a few options when it comes to getting started in philanthropy. But some of them might still be wondering at this point, sure, those options all sound great. However, I would like something small that I can start trying this week. And that could be anything. And we like to call it a little practice. So, what would be a practice you personally do, or something that you recommend to others to try when it comes to engaging in charity or charitable activities so that they can actually increase their life satisfaction?
So I guess what I would answer with is that taking a moment of self-reflection to think about what brings you happiness is going to help you in order to decide what is the best way for me to get involved with a charity. So for me personally, I'm a big reader. And so I also want to think about, how could I expand that love and help other people experience that love, whether it's through, donating books to libraries, something as simple as cleaning out an item in your house that you've loved but don't necessarily need anymore, and finding a good home for it besides the garbage. Could be a really simple way to think about how you've benefited from certain things and then could also lend them to others. My neighborhood has this really cool group called Buy Nothing. It's like on social media, and what you do simply is post things that you don't need anymore, whether it's kids' clothes or even somebody's mailed you something random. You can find a way to offer that to someone else, and most of the time there's somebody in your local community who needs that thing, and there's just a really great sense of belonging, but also appreciation, because I myself have benefited from other neighbors being generous, and then also been able to reciprocate that generosity. And that brings me a lot of happiness. And I would say I probably post things at least a couple times a month in an effort to stay engaged with that community, and it brings me a lot of happiness.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such an easy thing to do. The reflection part is as important as other parts. One thing that I realized when you were talking about doing that reflection is, how we were talking about reading and, finding escapism. I actually find that if we read and spend time reflecting on what we just read, oftentimes we'll just like find something that we can relate to it will ignite something small, or even it'll remind you of something that you used to struggle with so much in the past. And that will allow you to think about the different charities that you can potentially donate to. Like I remember I had this idea once because I remember when I was a student, I was so broke. I couldn't even, buy a lot of books to read. This is really funny. And you're just kind of like downloading PDFs that were available on the internet. And I realized that, oh, I struggle so much with that as a student. So I'm sure other people probably are struggling with that too. They probably really want to read these new amazing books, but they just cannot do that because they don't have the money. So maybe I should start something based on that concept, or I can donate my books to students' communities. And see, that's such a small thing. I didn't even think about that until I really took a moment to do my reflection. So I agree with you on that front. And I think that's a little practice that we can all do. Baby steps, it's not about doing the act of charity or donating straight away, but sometimes it's good to start by knowing what exactly we should be doing. And that helps with life satisfaction.
Exactly. Something you've benefited from, or maybe would have wanted to have benefited from at a point in the past.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Pay it
The
forward.
change.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. I really like that. And, I think this is going to be fun for our audience to try out because we don't talk about charities every day, right? Probably this is not like a conversation you talk to your friends quite often about. So, if they are deciding to tune into this episode and they found something interesting they can relate to, I guess this one particular practice is something they can try. And so simple. So thank you for sharing that. And I've been appreciating your time and just having so much fun talking about this topic. But I'm conscious of time and we're about to let you go very soon. So before we do that, I would love to invite you to your open mic. Before you leave the show, you have this platform to talk about anything you are passionate about. It could be about the topic we just discussed, or it could be about something else completely that you would like to share with our audience. So go for it.
So I would say I'm still very passionate about the topic we just discussed. It also has a lot to do with sustainability, thinking about how, instead of just, throwing something in the trash, somebody else out there could benefit from it. And also the beauty of secondhand items. So my sister has her master's in sustainability, and she's really opened my eyes to a lot of the waste in the world. And I would encourage everyone to think about how the happiness that certain items have brought them, and thinking about, how they could then use them to bring others joy. So I guess that's all I'll say about that.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing. I think it ties right into our topic of the day and exactly what you were saying earlier. I would say one thing I didn't know about, and not sure about the US, but this is quite a big thing in Australia. They have a lot of groups for suburbs, and sometimes they call it a good karma network, and they just post stuff like you were doing for your community, just post stuff they don't need, and they will post a location. You can just come here and pick these things up, so people know that oh, it is out there waiting for you. Or they would just be like, if you want to pick it up, let us know if it's a bigger item or something a bit more valuable. So they would just post it on and then tell people, if you want this, leave a comment or text us, and then we'll organize a time for you to come and get it. And I see a lot of amazing items that you probably would normally have to go on Facebook Marketplace to buy. And instead you get all these things for free. And then in exchange, obviously, you're going to do the same thing for one of your neighbors in the future. I think it's just so great. And more communities should do this, because where I'm from in Vietnam, this is not a thing. I don't think there's such a community yet. And I sincerely hope there will be in the future. And I think it's such a small thing that we can all engage in.
That's exactly the group I'm referencing. They're just called Buy Nothing groups here. And it's exactly that. And it's perfect for things like kids' items that they only use for 3 months. And so I've gotten a ton of things as gifts. And then when I'm done with them, you could just re-gift them. And it's a really great way to reuse, recycle, and then also just, be so giving to your neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, what a great topic to talk about. And, even just talking about the topic makes me feel a lot happier, knowing that there's so much good deed in the world. And thank you for being here today. I think it has been a really fun and engaging conversation. Now, before I let you go, I would love for you to share with our audience where we can find out more about your work.
I do have a website, as most academics do. So if you just Google my name, there's a Google site.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure our audience will be sure to check that out, especially on your studies on, what kind of questions, that's fascinating for those that would like to know more about it. And before we let you go, I just want to say one more time to our audience that if you are struggling and you don't know where to start, I think personally, this topic is really near and dear to my heart because I struggle so much with it. Didn't know how to sort of engage in charitable activities, engage in philanthropy, because especially as I was a student, I was kind of like, I'm a student. Where am I going to find the money and time to, donate to charity or, do charitable activities? But actually, there's so much we can do. And so I think I would encourage everyone to try something small today. And I'm saying this to remind myself as well, because sometimes life gets busy and I forget about it. So I'll probably do a closet clean this week and, maybe share a few items that I can just give away. And, that would make people happy and that'll make myself happier as well. So yeah, thank you for listening and do something nice this week. You have been listening to Sero Boost, the Happiness Science Insights podcast produced by the Happiness Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, ha.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.